Hello and welcome to YAF Podcast, yet another Final Fantasy podcast where I recap Final Fantasy games one by one, chapter by chapter, kind of a mix between a review, walkthrough, and deconstruction of these games. I have played some of the Final Fantasy games, but this is my first time kind of going through the series very seriously. I have beaten only one of the games, Final Fantasy IV on Game Boy Advance, and I have played Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy X, and Final Fantasy XIII, all in varying lengths, but never close to finishing them. Today I'm going to be talking about Final Fantasy I. In the last episode, I talked about the section called The Journey Begins. At least that's what the strategy wiki that I'm reading calls that section. During that time, kind of explored the rest of the main continent. At least that's what I would call it. And I visited, the Kingdom of Provoca? Is it Kingdom? It's a town. The town of Provoca, defeated the pirates and started sailing around the world, which has been a lot of fun. And in that playthrough, I decided not to look at the strategy, the walkthrough, and got all the way to the Elven Castle by myself, and I found the Western Keep and even the Marsh Cave. So I feel like I'm getting the hang of this game a little bit more. The game has gotten pre-grindy, not in that I have to grind, but in that there are so many frequent times I have to move from one location to another, and so many frequent encounters that I find myself fighting constantly. Though that kind of pays off, because then the difficult fights are actually pretty easy. So this section is called The Prince of Elfland, or Elfland, and the whole idea behind this section, or this quest, is to wake up the prince in Elfheim, which is the town that has the Elven Castle. The Elf King Prince, the Elfland Prince was, put under a curse or something, and he is sleeping, and to wake him, you have to get some kind of special tonic, and I don't remember how much of the guide told me about this and how much I learned from the game, but it was actually pretty straightforward trying to find everything that I needed to find. The design of the Elven town is actually really, really cool. A lot of the, it's unique, and you can tell that it's not the same type of town as you might see in other parts of the game. So, when you get to Provoca, it's the square, and it's got stone roads, and it's got stone buildings. And I'm talking about the Game Boy Advance version, the Dawn of Souls, I guess that's what it's called. It has it has substantially better graphics than the NES version, at least from what I can see. And so Provoca, was lots of stone buildings, and it looked very Western European medieval in design. And when you get to Elfheim, which is a really cool name and very simple name too, the buildings are all spread out, and it's kind of like you're walking through a forest, crossing streams and stuff, trying to get to the buildings that you want to find. And I find that very refreshing. I played Dragon Quest, and I played some other games, and sometimes it doesn't feel like there's enough variety between towns for you to tell them apart. Every town has an inn and whatever, and Elfheim has just, the same standard shops. On top of the same standard shops, you also have 2 copies of the Light Magic Store and the Dark Magic Store. I don't know what you'd call them. I don't know what those stores are called, but that's what I call them. They're, I think, level 3 and level 4 spells, basically. So, level 3 is in 2 of the shops, and level 4 spells are in the other 2 shops. So you can, really upgrade in this section. So once you find out that you need to wake up the prince because he has the mystic key, which you need for everything, I headed out to Western Keep. In Western Keep, you find a king who's like, hey, I don't have a crown. My crown is down in the Marsh Caves. So you go down to the Marsh Caves, which is actually another cool design because you kind of jump into a hole in the ground. I actually remember all these designs remind me so much of Chrono Trigger. You can really tell it's the same company, or maybe even the same people that worked on these games. So Marsh Cave is a basic cave that you just go through, you open a bunch of chests, try to go down as deep as possible, and once you get all the way down, you'll be able to find the crown. And once you have the crown, you can go back to the Western Keep to give it to the king, because he lost his crown. Give him the crown, but then he turns into Astos, the king of dark elves. He was pretending to be the king of Elfheim. Oh, okay, so I actually didn't know this. So I thought the prince was ruling, and because he was asleep, the kingdom was in disarray. But I guess Astos was supposed to be the king. But the Western Keep is completely empty. I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about this. It's just kind of an interesting tidbit that you have a Western Keep and it's empty except for the king. And then it turns out that it's not the real king. Anyway, so yeah, when you defeat Astos, he gives you the crystal lens, or I think it's called the crystal eye in the Game Boy Advance version. I've noticed some translation changes, even so much so that different levels of Marsh Cave have their signifier, like the number or whatever, switched. So instead of going down to floor 2B, it's like B2. It's really kind of strange, but it's fine. It's fine. So once you get to the Western Keep, once you defeat the king, so you can see there's a lot of travel. You go from Elfheim to Western Keep, from Western Keep down to Marsh Cave, and these are like across the huge continent part travels. You go from Marsh Cave back to Western Keep, and then from Western Keep, you'll probably go back to Elfheim so you can heal up, and from Elfheim you have to go back to Pravoka. So yeah, a lot of traveling. So you cross the entire ocean, and then from Pravoka, or like the port in Pravoka, you have to go all the way down to Matoya's cave, which is again across the entire continent, going almost all the way back to where you started. So it's a lot of travel. I'm gonna say that like battling Astos, the King of Elves, was pretty easy. Most of the battles that I've done are pretty easy, and I can't tell if it's because I've been following the guide and getting the right spells, and I want to talk about that, or if it's because I've been grinding so much. Because I like to grind when I'm bored, so I will put on a movie that I want to watch, and I'm just gonna be like traveling around and pressing A bunch and leveling up my characters. And with all the loot that you find in this entire process and all the spells, just seems pretty easy, and I like that. So then you return the crystal eye or the crystal lens or whatever, and Matoya's like, hey, here's the Jolt Tonic, and then you have to go all the way back to Pravoka, or the port in Pravoka, and then all the way down to the Elfheim port, then down to Elfheim. So you're like crossing the entire world. At least that's what it feels like. And then you revive the Elven Prince. He gives you the Mystic Key, and the Mystic Key is something that you can use to open a bunch of chests all over the entire world that you visited so far. You can go back to Western Keep, which is where I did go. And in the Western Keep, you can open loot out there. And what's kind of cool, and I'm going to mention this right now instead of after the review, you'll get a message that says that you need the Mystic Key to open it. So you could technically manually keep track of all the different places where you found chests that are inaccessible. And this just kind of brings me back to the beauty of gaming before the internet, which was kind of this like the exploration that you do on your own. You explore the dungeons, you write down notes about them. And I used to do that as a kid. Like, I used to even write down kind of the path to get through like one of the Pokemon caves, and I would write down notes about the game I'm playing so I could remember things. And this is one of those things where I could imagine being a kid playing through Final Fantasy, which I'm blown away by this game already, and then writing down like, oh, I need a Mystic Key. I'm gonna have to come back for this. And it keeps coming up, like Matoya's cave. You know, she says, well, I need a crystal lens. And you should write it down and be like, okay, I came across the crystal lens. That means that now it's time for me to go back there. And it keeps happening again and again. And it kind of feels like it weaves a better story, because you do visit and revisit locations and grow comfortable remembering where they are, how to get there, and finding more secrets and clues about that specific location. I remember almost all of the town names. Corneria is like the only one that like dropped out of my mind in just a few hours of this game. And I love it. I love that part. So anyway, you get the Mystic Key, then I went back to the Western Keep to open the rest of the chests, back to the Marsh Cave, again, so you're traveling across the entire world, back to Corneria, which is the starting spot of the entire game. And when you get there, and you have to get there, so this is not like a voluntary thing. Cornelia or Corneria? I thought it was Corneria. I cannot tell. Let's see, Cornelia. It's Cornelia. I'm so sorry that I've been saying it wrong. It's because there is a typo in the walkthrough, in the menu navigation of the walkthrough. Hello, this is Editing Antonin. Just a real quick note, and I'll be mentioning this in the future episodes. It is actually Corneria, I think, in the NES version, and it's Cornelia in the later versions. So I was wrong about the typo, and you can kind of understand my confusion about how to pronounce it and what to call that town. So in Cornelia, you actually find nitro powder, which is, I don't know what that means, basically. You're just like, alright, I found nitro powder. And then you have to go also to the Chaos Shrine, so the first boss, and you'll find like powerful swords there. A few things to note here is that I think the Game Boy Advance version has a lot of like niceties. For example, optimal gear. So I do this a lot, but whenever I pick up a new piece of gear, I go through the equipment of all of my characters and just click on optimal, and it automatically equips the best weapons that your character can have at the moment. And so I've been doing that a lot. And so I have like good equipment spread, and everybody's, just doing pretty well. So you pick up a few blades, and these blades have like special extra damage against each blade has like a special extra damage thing against some type of enemy, like spellcasters, war beasts, whatever it might be, which is neat. After that, I remember that mentioning this, I might have mentioned this before, but there was one more port that I didn't know why it was accessible and what to do there. Once you get to that port, it leads you down to Mount Durgar, and in Mount Durgar you give away that nitro powder, and an unhinged dwarf engineer decides to blow up a channel between the Western and the Aldi Sea. And I think the sea that I've been sailing is called Aldi, I guess? Yeah. And then you open up a bunch of chests and get a bunch of cool loot in Mount Durgar. And what was cool about Mount Durgar is that it's not a random encounter area. It's a real town. So again, you kind of like get this cool design aspect to this game where, you had Provoca, which was very prim and proper. You had Cornelia, which looks like a kingdom. You had Elfheim, which looked more like a elven forest town. And then you have Mount Durgar, which it looks like a dwarven town. You don't have any like weapons. You can't buy anything at this quote-unquote town because it's technically just a mine. But one thing to note is that there is a blacksmith. I think there's a blacksmith. Yeah, there's a blacksmith at the top of the cave. You talk to him and he's like, man, I wish I had some mineral called adamant, right? Like adamantium, I guess. Is this X-Men? And you can't do anything about him now, but immediately you're thrown back into that idea of like, you're gonna have to return to Mount Durgar once you get adamant, to make some kind of a sword. And that's it for the Prince of Elfland section. Once you open up the channel, you can go to the Western Sea, and looks like the next quest will be getting the Crystal of Earth, or lighting the Crystal of Earth, or what do you want to call it. A few things to note here that, like I said, I enjoyed were the varied towns. That has been fantastic. The music is beautiful. I don't listen to video game music often. Again, I tend to like just play games while I watch a movie or watch a TV show or do whatever else. So I tend to have all of my games on mute. I did unmute this game a few times and just really thoroughly enjoyed the music. I love the feeling of just like how far I've gotten with this game, because I have to keep backtracking to like Chaos Shrine, Cornelia, Provoca, and even back to Elfheim, because you get finished with it and you still have to come back. So you find yourself in these sections that you've gone through before and you feel so powerful. I battled against the crazy horses, I think they're called, and they when you start the game, they're formidable enemies, and now your mage can one hit KO them, right? You can OHKO them pretty easily, and you just kind of like move on. It feels really fun and really good that you kind of feel like you're the master of your domain. So when you have to make that trip from Provoca to Cornelia, it's not a trip you have to stock up on potions for. When you go from Provoca to Elfheim, you don't have to stock up on potions for that, because you're so powerful that even if you encounter a full field of high-level monsters, you have ways of destroying them. I'm also enjoying the strategy in this game, so I'm not good at figuring out combos or figuring out RPGs and how to make your characters as powerful as possible. So I've been following some of the small tips in the guide, and there's just something really satisfying about the fact that when I cast Haste on Thief, my thief becomes like this super powered warrior. When I cast Temper on my warrior, that warrior is so much stronger now. And when I cast Invis on my red mage, that red mage does not have to worry about being killed by any of the other monsters. So you find yourself just super powerful with the right combination of things, right? And putting the right role on your character. Realizing that red mage, despite being a powerful physical attacker, has spells. And so you can rely on those spells to boost your other characters. And the fact that Haste makes Thief so much more powerful is amazing. I don't know. There's something satisfying about the leveling in this game and the way your characters mesh together. This was something that I never really appreciated about the Final Fantasy games. The synergy that you can create between characters, and obviously, and I use that word and then I laugh to myself because Final Fantasy 13 is all about synergy. But in Final Fantasy 13, it's kind of like the game figures that out for you. They're like, hey, these two characters work well as this and this kind of setup, and this and this kind of setup. And so you can't really do that manually, but it highlights just how powerful characters can become when they take on a specialized role, right? So when the white mage isn't trying to clobber somebody with their low attack, and when you have the red mage taking a back seat to improve other characters or like strengthen the other characters before the red mage attacks and things like that. So even when I was like facing lots of enemies in Marsh Cave, which Marsh Cave can be difficult, it was pretty easy for the red mage to cast Fira on all of the slimes, and the slimes are weak to magic. So you had this one character, one hit kill everybody. But then in other situations, you take a step back and be like, all right, red mage, cast haste, cast temper, cast whatever you need to do. It's also cool that you can use magic outside of battle. I know that's normal for Final Fantasy games. Coming from the Pokemon franchise, where you have to have something special in order to use certain attacks out of battle, it's kind of refreshing to be able to rely on my white mage for healing, poison heal, paralyze heal, and all these things, instead of having to rely on the items that I bought. Technically, I guess if I had enough money, I would just go for buying lots of ether and then just relying on my white mage to do all of the stuff that you would expect your items to do. So that's been kind of cool, because like Poisona, which is the poison cure, is like 2 MP or 3 MP, and because I basically never run out of MP, it's been easy to just use my mage for these things. It's just been really cool. I've been enjoying this game a lot more than I thought. I always thought Final Fantasy 1 was a very archaic game. Like, I've played the original Legend of Zelda, and the original Legend of Zelda does not in any way feel straightforward or understandable. That game, like, I know I'm comparing apples to oranges, but with Final Fantasy, if you get lost, you at least gain a lot of experience. If you find a difficult enemy, you can grind some more to win. With games like Legend of Zelda, there weren't as many guardrails in terms of where you're supposed to go, and because it doesn't have that RPG aspect, you don't gain anything by wandering around, right? You don't get extra cool weapons, you don't get loot, you don't get gold, I guess. I mean, you get rupees, but not really in a substantial way where you'd go farm for rupees, I guess. I know it's a different type of game, but just really enjoying Final Fantasy having these guardrails and these intricate... It's not even intricate, it's just like a story that is woven really well. You feel like you're living more so in this world, that this world existed without you. You can kind of bring things together, like getting that crystal eye from the Dark Elf, taking it to Matoya, and having Matoya provide you with a tonic that heals the Elf Prince. So, you save Elfheim, you destroy the big baddie there, and just keep moving forward. It's also cool to encounter all these different races, like the Dwarven race and the Elf race, that they're not intermingled, but they live close by. It just kind of reminds me of Lord of the Rings, how you had the dwarves living in Moria, and then you had the elves living in, I don't want to say Mirkwood. What is that other? I don't remember the forest, but basically like right at the bottom of the Moria, the mountains, out the misty mountains, you have the elves. And so here you have the elves living in one side of the part of the land, and you have the dwarves living in the mountains as well. Anyway, so in the next episode, I'll be covering my quests to, I guess, get or do something with the Crystal of Earth. I'm very much looking forward to it. I hope you tune in for the next episode. I'm looking at the walkthrough, and we are on, I guess, chapter 4, or like the fourth section. The Crystal of Earth is the 4th section out of 10. Yeah, so we're on the 4th section out of 10. That means that we're almost halfway through, and I'm excited about that. Until next time.